I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I hope you're having a good day, but you know, there's one thing we all go through, and if you haven't yet, you eventually will, and that is loss. And you know, it's never easy. I'm at the age where I have elderly parents. I mean, they're still doing great. You see them on TV, but they're facing a lot of loss. They're losing a lot of their friends, and it's really one of those things that you never fully prepare for. But I do think there are some things that you can learn that better prepare you when it does happen. And Scripture says to grieve with those who grieve, and there is something to that grieving process that should be healthy, can be healthy. I think it's necessary, but if not done right, it can actually do damage. And so I don't know where you're at. Maybe you're going through grief right now. Maybe you have the sense that you could be going through it soon just because of aging or health situations. Or maybe you just want to prepare yourself for those times and be able to help others, and by which I primarily mean just be with others, because there's a lot of times it's your presence that's more powerful than anything. But this conversation, I do think, will help you. And I've got someone who has written a book that is available now. It's called Now That She's Gone. It's written by Chelsea Ohlemiller, and she joins me today. She's a blogger, by the way. You might have seen her Happiness, Hope, and Health Realities blog. If not, that's a good reference resource for you. But she's a mother and wife and daughter. So she joins us today to talk a little bit about this grieving process in a way that I think will be beneficial no matter where you're at. Chelsea, welcome to Life Today Live.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm just so thrilled that you're willing to have a conversation centered around grief, because just like you said, it's extremely universal. And if you haven't already been impacted, you will. And, that makes the conversation important.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you're talking about in the book. I know, but give the audience an idea of kind of where this came from, because it's very personal for you.
Yeah, so before 2017, I was an educator. I always knew I wanted to be an educator, and got rattled in 2017 when my mom passed away of cancer. She was only 57. Mm-hmm. And I found myself surrounded by great friends, great family, but I was different, and no one knew what to do with me. No one knew what to say. And because I wasn't truly prepared for a profound loss like that, I hid my grief. I realized it made people uncomfortable. Heartbreak makes people uncomfortable. And so I started writing initially just to talk about the things that were making others, shy away from in conversation with me, and just to heal and process what was happening in my life and how my future would look. And it ended up just being a beautiful community where we talk about grief, we honor grief, and not just the harsh elements, but the happiness and joy that can come from those moments too. And so it's a complicated thing that I wanted to make sure we were honoring both the harsh realities and the joy of grief.
And the way that we handle these things oftentimes depends on the relationship with the person. It could be very different. How is your relationship with your mother?
Yes, that's such an important question. I had a wonderful relationship with my mother. She was the foundation of love and hope and faith in our family, and we were extremely close. And I'm glad that you asked that question, because in the book, I'm writing from my own experience with my mother, and we were very close. But I also include stories in there, which I wrote from women who had complicated and complex relationships with their parents and their mom, because I wanted anybody that picked up this book to find value and truth inside of it. And so I realized after my mom passed just how blessed I was in our relationship, because I realized not everybody is that lucky to have that.
Yeah, no doubt. And that can make it hard if you're like attending a funeral of someone you know and you know the relationship was not good. It gets real awkward real fast, and like we've been there. Was your mother a believer, a Christian?
Absolutely. That is my mother, and my whole mother side of the family is where I gained my faith, where I learned about faith. And that's why it was complicated when she passed, because for a while, no one told me that your faith can be challenged. And at first, I thought my faith was non-existent. After my mom left, I thought, why her? She was such a devoted, Christian and woman. And so I felt like when my mom passed, I also lost my faith. And in that journey, luckily, after I was able to sit with it and process it more, I realized that my faith was always there. It was just simply being challenged. And through the pain and through the loss and through my mom's legacy, I realized I now have a faith stronger than I ever did. But it took a while to, go through those things and admit what was happening in my life and in my beliefs.
So I asked this question because I think I understand a little bit. My wife lost her mother when her mother was 56, lost her to cancer. I lost my younger sister when she was 40 to cancer. Was it the cancer that really made you question your faith in a lot of ways?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't just the cancer. It was also just watching somebody that you love immensely debilitate in front of your eyes so quickly.
I know.
And just the deterioration of a life and a physical body really challenged my confusion and questions about what was happening, and how the same God that can do miracles and create so much beautiful light in this world, how is that the same God that allows cancer and disease and destruction? And so I really had to sit with that and, dive deeper into it as both kind of, a daughter of my mother and also a daughter of Christ, just to figure those questions out. And it was only when I got brave enough to admit what was happening that I became a really good learner in, all of those things that my mom had so beautifully built in my life as a foundation.
Yeah, for me, that's the hard thing. It's like, why this suffer? It's like the first funeral I went to was my grandfather, who was my dad's foster dad, and I was very close to. He was great, but he was old, and even as a kid, you kind of go, he died of old age was basically what everybody said, and you kind of get that a little bit, but man, when someone dies too soon and they suffer on the way, that can really challenge your faith. You're like Martha when Lazarus died the first time. And you're like, Jesus, if you'd have been here, everything would be all right. And you kind of feel like, where was God in this? Where did you go with that?
Yes. Oh, that's so powerful, because what ended up happening for me is that two things came into my life at the same time. And one was I was sitting with at church, and a pastor said to us, there's joy in everything. And if you don't see it, then you're not looking from the right perspective. And at first, I wanted to walk out. I wanted to say, there was not joy in this.
Yeah, right.
And then somebody else that was there and that I even saw again in the future said to me, have you ever looked at the beauty from your mom's perspective and her transition into heaven, instead of you holding her hand and the darkness and heartbreak of the loss?
Wow.
And that hit me, because I realized, number one, it was two goodbyes. It was my mom's goodbye and it was my goodbye. And while I'm still here, on earth living, she's, just living differently. And if I can now look at it from the beauty of her hope and her faith, it really does take away a lot of the sting of what I'm left here living with.
I wished I'd heard that. My sister's funeral, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, his brother came in, and they let you go into the funeral, the room with the casket and the flowers and everything before, as a part of the family. I don't know if they do this for everybody. For us, they're like, yeah, go in there, take some time. That way, when you go in and everybody else is sitting there, I guess you're supposed to be able to hold it together better, right?
Right.
So we went in there and we're standing in the back, and this is a big funeral for my sister, and there's flowers everywhere, and in the casket. And my brother-in-law's brother said, "Boy, isn't that beautiful?" And I just, without thinking, I go, "That's the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life,"
Yep.
And that's, I laugh about it now because the poor guy, he was trying to comfort me,
right.
and I didn't say it me, but it's like, it just hurts, man. It's rough, and it's even with we were raised in the church. We don't grieve as those who have no hope. The scriptures and eternal life. It's just really hard in that moment, especially to have sort of that eternal perspective, or to look at it from another point of view. Did you click with that immediately, or did it take a little while for that to sink in?
It took a while. I mean, and I think the beautiful transition is when I was able to see that, when I was able to live with more of the reminiscence and that perspective shift of my mom's passing instead of the reality of what was missing, and that both things can be true, but yeah, I think that we're not always open to the truth. And we just have to wait until we are, because, sometimes you have to be the hope provider and give those people hope that need it. And then sometimes the person needs to receive the hope. But right away, I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't in a mode where I could receive that. So it definitely took time.
Yeah. I think we need to just cut ourselves a lot of slack, and others, extend grace, because grief is a process, and you have to go through a process, and there are different stages. I mean, do you feel like you were able to go through the grieving process in a somewhat healthy way?
Yeah, I think that there are the stages of grief, but really for me, I felt like, and I talk about it in the book, I feel like it was more of a web or a labyrinth, that it was just this thing that you're constantly moving through. And grief is a journey. It's not a place to be stagnant. And I had to learn that, because I realized that I did not want my mother's death to multiply. And what I mean by that is that she was gone, not here physically anymore. But by me just pausing life and letting grief be the more powerful element, I wasn't living. I was surviving, but I wasn't living. And I didn't want that to continue. And I also had to learn that, when the world says, leave your troubles at the door or leave your stress at the door, grief isn't like that. It's not like a backpack where you can take it off and leave it somewhere. I think it's more like a new skin or a shadow that kind of follows you in each new thing that you do. And to best live, you have to learn how to incorporate it into your life.
Yeah. You don't get over it. You learn to live with it.
Yep.
And we hear at a lot of funerals, the 23rd Psalm, yea, if you use the old King James, yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And that was a powerful, not just because it's a comforting psalm, but because it actually lays out, I think, some very deep truths when it comes to this idea of loss and grieving. And that is one, the valley is a valley. It is a low place. Yeah. And the shadow that death casts over is dark. And it's real. I mean, we shouldn't ever deny it. The grief, the pain is very real. But there's no shadow without a light.
Exactly.
And the light is there, even though you're not in it when you're in the grief. And the thing about it is you have to walk through it. And as you walk through it, you don't fear the evil. As long as you keep walking, you know you'll eventually get to the light, and God's with you even in the dark places. Did you ever sense God's presence even in the grief, even as you question your own beliefs?
Absolutely. And the first thing that you said, just the fear, that was a huge perspective shift for me too, because my mom had no fear at the end. She knew it was coming. She told us, I think it's time. That's one of the last things my mom said to us. She had no fear. And so on my hardest days, a couple of years into my grief, I had to sit with myself and say, if my mom left without any fear, then why am I sitting in fear of a world that doesn't have her anymore? Because she's here just in a completely different way. And I had to learn that, and I realized that, just like scripture says, and just like, people are always telling stories of that, you're never alone. God is with you. But I didn't feel that at first.
Sure.
I didn't feel that.
Sure.
But again, I wasn't open to it. I think I was so much in a place of struggle and darkness that I forgot it's like a storm. Just because all you see is darkness, the beauty is still above the clouds. There's still sun and beautiful blue light and atmosphere. And I think sometimes grief lets us forget that. And so I'm so glad now, 7 years in, that, my biggest and boldest purpose is to live out my mom's legacy so that she'd be proud. And so eventually I'm creating my own.
I love it. All right. We are talking to Chelsea Ohlemiller. This is a book that she has written about her experience and some others that will help anyone who's dealing with grief. The book's called Now That She's Gone. It's available wherever you get books. And I want to ask you, because Chelsea, you mentioned that, someone said something to you that you didn't necessarily receive at the time, but has helped you, a good word. Did you, were there is that a word? Were things said that weren't helpful that you might want to just caution people to maybe, you don't have to say those things, because some people don't know what to say.
Right.
And especially in the Christian world, we might want to, just, count it all joy. And you're like, what are you talking about?
Yep.
Were there some things said that you'd be like, maybe you shouldn't say that?
Yes, there were a lot. But I always tell people now that, if you're coming from a place of grace and compassion, it doesn't matter always what you say. Just it does, just keep showing up, and don't be too afraid to say the wrong thing, that you aren't saying something. And so I realize now that most of the people that said those things that stung were naive to grief or hadn't really held a profound loss. And if they have to be naive, I would rather keep them there than to have the knowledge that I do. But the hardest thing people said, and this may surprise you, it wasn't, the people that said, oh, she's in a better place, even though I wanted her here. It wasn't that. But it was the people that I felt took her voice. They would say, your mom wouldn't want you to, or your mom would want you to.
Oh.
And that was hard for me, because I thought, while we all know how my mom lived, so we probably know what she would want and say, I felt like they were taking her voice and stealing her influence. And so that was really hard for me. But again, with time, I realized, they all mean well.
Yeah, but we can do better than meaning well.
That's true. That's
right?
true.
The reality, my understanding, and from talking to a lot of people that are, whatever, they're grief counselors or even first responders, some situations, it's your presence that means the most. And sometimes when you don't know what to say, it's better not to say anything, because, again, it's your presence that means the most. Just be there. And another thing that I've been told that I think is true and very helpful is, in trying to help, avoid forcing that person who's grieving to make more decisions than they're already having to. Even just something as simple as, hey, I'm gonna go get us something to eat. Do you want Mexican? Do you want Chinese? Do you want, because they're like, I'm having to deal with heavy decisions. Better to say, hey, I'm going to go get some Chinese food. Can I bring you some rice and chicken, or, right? Yep. And just simplify. And those are actually very helpful and comforting. And it seems oversimplified, but it actually is profound. And so, I think we can be better support, and the awkwardness goes away when you're better prepared. And I appreciate that in your book. Let me ask you this, because you mentioned a word a couple of times, and I know you write about this in the book, and that's the idea of legacy. When you have a good relationship with a parent, that legacy never goes away. What does your mother's legacy mean to you, and how have you in some ways taken it on yourself?
Yeah, I think her last gift was her legacy. And so my mother's legacy is definitely one of faith and showing up for people, not because she feels like she needs to, but because she feels like she was called to. And I think that more than anything, just using everything that happens in our lives to help other people. And that's exactly why I wrote this book. I wanted it to be, it's my mom's favorite color, so it's lavender. I wanted it to be something she would love, something that she would have sitting by her nightstand. And more than anything, I wanted it to be something beyond food and cards. I wanted it to be something you could give somebody and it would be there for them. And I think in doing that, it extends my mom's legacy to helping people, which is what she lived her life to do.
I love that. I love that. Was there anything that you learned that maybe surprised you in the grieving process?
That, I heard so many people tell me at the beginning, year one is the hardest. If you can just get through all of the first, then grief will be better. It'll be lighter. But what people fail to understand is that that's completely not true, in that the first year is really just the first. Yes, it's the first Christmas and holiday, but beyond that, you're going to encounter first forever. When I had my child and my mom wasn't there, that was another first that came afterward. And my mom actually passed away right before my wedding. That was another first, and even 7 years in, I'm still experiencing firsts. My sister had a child and I became an aunt, and that was a new first. And so I always try to equip people to know, the first, yes, is a unique year, but you're going to encounter first 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, because there's always going to be an opportunity where you thought they would be here and they're not.
Yeah. And honestly, I think is the hardest thing, especially when someone passes away at an earlier age, because it's the things that they would have wanted to be there for that they're not there for. And it's just, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's hard and it stinks, And I think it's okay to say that. And so you're 7 years in. Do you experience what I experienced? And it does lessen, I think, with time, but it still happens. And that is, grief can jump up and grab you in the weirdest, most unexpected moments.
Yep. For me, it was the grocery store. The baking aisle of the grocery store hit me like I was not expecting it, but my mom was an amazing baker, and, we collected her recipes after she passed. And the first time I walked into that aisle, knowing my mom would never bake another cake, it hit me, because I realized I have all the ingredients. I can do it myself. But because my mom made it, that's what made it so special. She made it with a love that you can't buy at a store. And so that really surprised me. And it's those moments, like, for instance, today is actually my mother's birthday.
Oh, wow.
And so it's days not like today where you can see it coming and you prepare, but it's like a few days before a significant day and you don't see it coming. And you would think that the longer you sit with grief, you do learn your vulnerable moments, but you also still get so surprised by them.
Yeah, and I think it's okay. I love that you walk down that aisle and you're flooded with beautiful memories. And even though it's tender still, I think it's okay. as long as you don't get stuck, and that's, I think, the other side of grief, the negative side of grief, is that if you don't go through it and you stay in it, it can actually become damaging. Do you deal with getting people through it and not having them stagnate in it? Because I do know, some people that it turns sour, Yep. How do you get into that too much about how to not be stuck in it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just really relieving the pressure of having to do more and be more and just honoring this moment, because obviously it's hard. Obviously it's heavy. And so when you get in these moments, for me, sometimes it's either in the shower or on the bathroom floor where I'm just kind of tucked away by myself and letting it hit me, and letting the emotion go and just letting yourself do that. But then also making a promise to yourself that I'm going to sit here for this amount of minutes or this amount of time, and then I'm going to get up. And it may not be what I want to do, and it may not be fun or easy, but I'm going to keep walking. And you have to just keep challenging yourself to make those commitments to not stay. You're not always going to stay in the joy either, knowing that you're always going to be in this beautiful web of love and reminiscence, but inside of that web is also loss and heartbreak and anger and jealousy and all of those things that are going to come with losing someone you love.
Yeah, and I don't know where people might be, but like Chelsea's saying, you got to get up. It's that walking through that valley of the shadow. It's not fun. It's dark, but keep walking. And some days that means breathing. That means getting out of bed. That means taking care of the things that you need to take care of. And even though you may feel like you're a little bit on autopilot or in a fog or something, you just keep walking, and you will eventually. You can walk out of it. Now there are situations where you may need to sit down with a grief counselor or a pastor or a friend sometimes, but let others come alongside you and walk you through it. But you can get through it. But it is real, and we don't deny that. I want to show people your website. This is hopeandharshrealities.com. And, you've got those two things paired, because loss, death is a harsh reality, but there is hope. And for those in Christ, and I would say if you're not a believer, this is the hardest thing in the world for me, because I've been to these funerals. If you're not a believer, I have a real hard time offering hope, other than if you're alive and breathing, you can be born again and you can live in that hope. But especially if you are a believer, that the hope is there. It never goes away. And we don't grieve as those who have no hope, but doesn't mean we don't grieve. We absolutely do. Right. I want to give you the last word, Chelsea. I appreciate your vulnerability and letting me ask some hard questions and putting these things in a book to comfort others. What do you want to leave people with today?
Mostly just knowing that you had such a beautiful love, and that's why your grief is powered so intensely. And that, the more powerful the grief, usually the more powerful the relationship. And so honor that and realize what a gift that is, because like you said, not everybody has a legacy worth replicating. Some people are holding a legacy worth eliminating, and doing a different way. And so just honoring wherever you are in your grief journey, and just knowing that even if you are in the darkness and you don't see the light, I promise you it's there. And surround yourself with people that remind you of the light, remind you to breathe, and remind you to keep stepping forward.
Yeah. So good. So true. Thank you. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys out there watching. If you know someone who's going through a difficult time, you might want to hit that share button and say, hey, maybe this will encourage you. And if you want a good resource for yourself, for anyone else that's going through grief, now that she's gone, it's available wherever you get books. If you haven't liked, followed, or subscribed, I invite you to do that. You'll get more encouragement here. We'll see you next time on Life Today Live.
We float on the vast, limitless sea of divine mercy.